Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's such a pleasure and privilege to be here. Dr. John Howland and Dr. Paul Carpentier were with me and my wife during the 2012 campaign against Question 2. We did a number of presentations throughout Worcester County and some in Middlesex County. They had a lawyer, a doctor, and a facilitator. Mary Ann was generally the facilitator, or Allison Ledoux here in Worcester. And I was the lawyer, and Dr. Carpentier or Dr. Howland was the physician. And it was a long haul, and we're not taking any credit. Credit is to God. Because if you look at the election results, and as Matt was alluding to, the polls going into the election, that's the only explanation. But we'll get into some of that. Does everyone have a good lunch? Yes. Is everyone ready for a nap? Yes. Well, today's your lucky day, because I'm going to be talking about very abstruse points of law and analyzing legislation. It'll put you right to sleep. So please take a look at the graphic on the screen. These are the pills, the capsules that are used in the state of Oregon, the state of Washington. You have to take 100 of them in order to die with dignity. And generally they're taken apart and put into a glass of water and mixed up, and you chug it down, and that's supposed to be a successful end to your endeavor. So the talk will be in three parts. The first part, a brief post-mortem on the referendum. The second part will be a brief discussion of the ballot question 2, what that would have enacted had it been voted on by the public. And the third is on House Bill 1998, which your efforts, thanks be to God, contributed to its, if not defeat, it's at least death for this session. So, there we go. Question 2 was defeated by a margin of 100,000 votes out of 3 million cast. The defeat was not due to the fact that most Massachusetts voters disagree philosophically with some form of death with dignity or assisted suicide. Question 2 was defeated because a very diverse coalition came together and worked very hard to defeat a specific law, not to defeat a principle of philosophy. So, just to give you some statistics on the what we faced going into this election in November of 2012. Polls prior to the election, in October, a poll that was taken October 2nd to 8th, yes, 65%, no, 19%. Poll in September, yes, 68%. Another September poll, Suffolk University Channel 7, yes, 64%, no, 27%. An August poll, yes, 58%, no, 24%. And depending on how you read these, we were even losing ground going into the election. The coalition was, as I say, extraordinarily diverse. The committee headed by Roseanne Bacon-Mead, the disability rights group, Second Thoughts, very, very important. They were just a tremendous force in putting forth the culture of life philosophy. The Massachusetts Medical Society, African American clergy such as Reverend Liz Walker, distinguished citizens who don't necessarily agree with us on other life issues, like Victoria Reggie Kennedy. Was Zeke Emanuel, Rahm Emanuel's brother, very distinguished bioethicist, all opposed to physician-assisted suicide. Rasky Berline did a great job. John Martilla, the very distinguished Democratic pollster, I had dinner with him after the election. Doesn't agree with us on much anything else. Very firm against any form of physician-assisted suicide. 51% of the voters were convinced that question 2 was bad law, even though many of these people agreed with in concept with death with dignity. Largely overlooked by the analysts was the minority vote. In the African American precincts of Boston, question 2 was voted down by between 2/3 and 3/4 in just about every precinct. By the way, that same percentage was the difference with medical marijuana, only it was the opposite. But and there are very distinct reasons that I think physician-assisted suicide, death with dignity, whatever, would resonate with the African American community. And across the state, the African American vote may well have provided the crucial difference in the defeat of question 2. Now, it's important to remember a campaign is not the time to convince people philosophically of why they're wrong and you're right and what the underlying reasons are for your position. Campaign is the time to get votes. And really, I don't care why, during a campaign, why somebody votes for my position. I just want to win. Now, there is a time to try to change the hearts and minds of people on a philosophical level, and that time is now, before there's an election, in your churches, in the marketplace, at your places of work, in your neighborhoods. Very, very important, because the culture is increasingly becoming, as you know, secular. The culture is becoming very, for want of a better term, pro-death. So, as I said, before I get into House Bill 1998, I just would like to very briefly discuss what the framework of what the ballot question tried to do, which is in many ways replicated in House Bill 1998. A patient who has fewer than 6 months to live, according to a physician, who's a resident of Massachusetts, makes an oral request to the doctor under the ballot question. The prescription cannot be given sooner than 15 days after the oral request and sooner than 2 days after a written request. The written request must be witnessed by 2 people, one of whom can't be an heir, one of whom can't be a relative. There has to be a consultation with the physician, the treating physician, and a consultation with a consulting physician before the prescription can be given. That's the basic framework. Now, House Bill 1998 is slightly different. Again, any adult resident of Massachusetts suffering from a condition which is presumed to cause death within 6 months may request from his or her attending physician medication which would end the patient's life in a humane and dignified manner. And like the ballot question, House Bill 1998 repeats as a mantra every time ending life is mentioned. It's always followed by the words "in a humane and dignified manner." So that if this passes, under the laws of the Commonwealth, a person who's administered these drugs dies in a humane and dignified manner. and don't say no. Like the ballot question, the bill mandates that the patient be an adult, which is defined as 18 years of age or older, a resident of Massachusetts suffering from a terminal disease or condition which can reasonably be expected to cause death within 6 months, and again, requires a written request signed by 2 persons. Like the ballot question, the Act states that one of the witnesses may not be someone entitled to a share of the person's estate at the time the request is made, which means, of course, is that one of the witnesses can be entitled to a share of the estate. When I did my talk on the ballot question a couple of years ago, I had illustrated it with a story about Uncle Charlie and his sleazy nephew Felix, and Felix's girlfriend Francesca. And Felix and Francesca could both be witnesses because Francesca wasn't an heir at law and wasn't a relative by blood marriage or adoption. Like the ballot question, the bill requires the attending physician must inform the patient of the medical diagnosis, the prognosis, the potential risks of taking the medication, and I suppose one would be you might live, the probable result of taking the medication, and feasible alternatives, including hospice care, comfort care, and pain control. Also, like the ballot question, some other parts of the bill remain. For example, the definition of self-administer again states that this is the quote-unquote act of ingesting, but act of ingesting is not defined. So someone can administer orally the medication to the patient, and it need not be the patient that takes the prescribed dose, him or herself. The definition of capable remains the same, namely, having the capacity to make healthcare decisions and to communicate them to healthcare providers, including communication through persons familiar with the patient's manner of communicating if those persons are available. Yeah, Grandma grunted once, that means she wants it. This is kind of dangerous ground we're treading on. Incompetent patients will most likely be able to be subject to physician-assisted suicide. Now remember, the law says you have to, the patient has to sign a written document in order to get the prescription. However, in Massachusetts, incompetent patients have the same rights as competent patients, and that was enshrined into law in the case of Patricia Brophy versus New England Sinai Hospital. Anyone remember that case? A firefighter in Easton, Massachusetts, Anne? Thank you. Firefighter in Easton, Massachusetts had a brain aneurysm. He went into a persistent vegetative state. He had a gastrostomy tube inserted into his side for feeding, and his wife, who was also his guardian, asked that it be removed. Now, he wasn't in danger of dying. He was in danger. He would live indefinitely with, as long as he was fed through the gastrostomy tube. The Supreme Judicial Court held, well, if Mr. Brophy were competent, he has the right to have this withdrawn, and because he's incompetent, he should not be denied that right. So the feeding tube was withdrawn. Food and water, nutrition and hydration were deemed to be medical treatment and not given in the ordinary course. So this was a bad decision on a number of levels. Judge Nolan, Justice Joe Nolan, was on the Supreme Judicial Court at the time, gave a classic dissent, and very hard-hitting, railed against the secular humanism, in parenthesis, modern paganism, enshrined in the decision, and ended his dissent with the words pro dolor, for shame. However, even requiring written informed consent does not prohibit an incompetent patient from availing him or herself from one of these rights. Matter of Mary Moe, a 1982 case, in spite of a law requiring written informed consent for a person to be sterilized, the Supreme Judicial Court allowed a guardian to petition the probate court to authorize sterilization of her incompetent ward. Tragic case, a young woman had been institutionalized for many years. She was 26, suffered what the decision says was a sexual incident, and her mother, who was her guardian, asked that her daughter be sterilized. Sterilization could only be done if, under the law, which is still on the books, only if the patient herself signed in writing a request that the sterilization be performed. The court said, no, you don't need that because incompetent patients are able to avail themselves of this in spite of the requirement of a writing. Okay, there are some important differences between the bill and the ballot question, and the differences go against us except for one minor one. The preamble to the bill states, the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts affirms the existing right of capable terminally ill patients to request compassionate aid in dying and obtain medication from a physician meeting medical best practices that the patient can choose to self-administer to bring about a humane and dignified death. The lack of a "to" before "bring" is in the original. Bring about a humane and dignified death. So this law is recognizing a right that in fact does not exist, and it would seem to enshrine this right. Obtaining the drugs to kill oneself would now be a pre-existing right. The ballot question defines a procedure. The bill defines a right which the procedure will help you to exercise. But the right only adheres if the patient is capable and terminally ill. Under the bill, under case law, much different. The ballot question had at least some protections. The prescription could not be written sooner than 15 days after a written request and 48 hours after an oral request. The bill eliminates the waiting period and the oral request. You can come in, it's basically, it could be a same-day procedure. The ballot question required a consulting physician to examine the patient and his or her relevant medical records and confirm in writing the attending physician's diagnosis that the patient is suffering from a terminal disease and would verify that the patient is capable, is acting voluntarily, and has made an informed decision. So at least the consulting physician would be a check and a balance against the attending physician. Like the ballot question under the bill, like the ballot question under the bill, a consulting physician must examine the patient and his or her medical records, confirm in writing the attending physician's diagnosis that the patient is suffering from a terminal condition, and verify the patient is capable, acting voluntarily, and has made an informed decision. Well, that's all well and good, but the bill allows the attending physician to waive the requirement of the consulting physician. Two reasons are given. If the examination would result in undue hardship to the patient because the terminal condition is sufficiently advanced that confirmation of the illness is not necessary, or An appointment with a consulting physician can be made within a reasonable amount of time or with the physician is within a reasonable distance of the patient's residence. So who determines reasonableness? The attending physician. Now, if confirmation of the terminal condition may be used to waive the need for a consulting physician, what happens to an analysis of whether the patient is capable, acting voluntarily, and has made an informed decision? It goes out the window. There is no check and balance. As Patrick Henry said, I smell a rat. Like the ballot question, the bill specifically does not require the patient's family to be notified that the patient has requested the fatal medication, Section 10. The bill says that they encourage the family to be notified, but there's nothing that requires the family, if one is available, to be notified. Like the ballot question, the bill does not require the patient to be referred for psychological or psychiatric counseling, except if the attending physician believes the patient to be suffering from a disorder or depression causing impaired judgment. So the patient could be suffering from depression, but in the eyes of the attending physician it doesn't cause impaired judgment, then a referral to a mental health professional will not be made. Like the ballot question, the bill requires the falsification of the death certificate. The death certificate is to be, may be filled out by the attending physician, but the death certificate shall list the underlying disease as the cause of death, not the poison that's been prescribed. Like the ballot question, the bill has a bare requirement that unused medication shall be disposed of by lawful means with no safeguard in place. Well, what's lawful means for disposition? In the case of Oregon and Washington, there are many people who have requested the medication but who have not taken the medication. And some die without having taken the medication. So there are stockpiles of this, I think it's phenobarbital, in patients' medical cabinets. Now, if you're cities like Boston, one of the first places they break-in person goes is the medicine cabinet. So a lot of this stuff is just uncontrolled and uncontrollable. Unlike the ballot question, conscience protections for institutions such as religious healthcare facilities are weakened. Ballot question allowed a healthcare facility, a hospital, nursing home, what have you, to prohibit administration of the prescription or the drugs on their premises. The bill contains no such protection for institutions regarding doctors who prescribe aid in dying. The bill further requires healthcare facilities which recuse themselves to create a consumer disclosure which will identify the services in which they refuse to participate, clarify differences between institution-wide objections and those that may be raised by individual licensed providers who are employed by or contract with the provider. So every hospital has to give a spreadsheet, flow chart, what have you, of where the institution differs from the individual practitioner. Describe the mechanism the provider would use to provide patients a referral to another provider or provider in the provider service. This is in the bill. I didn't make up all these providers who are willing to perform the specific healthcare service, and describe the provider's policies and procedures relating to transferring patients to other providers who will implement the healthcare decision. The cost, inform the consumers the cost of the transfer will be borne by the transferring provider, and describe the internal and external consumer complaint processes available to persons affected by the provider's objections. A lot of burden placed on healthcare institutions which dissent from the requirements of this bill. Finally, Section 14.5 says, state regulations, documents, and reports shall not refer to the practice of aid in dying under this chapter as suicide or assisted suicide. Well, why is this man smiling? That's George Orwell. So, anyway, I'd be happy to take any questions you may have. Linda?
The previous slide, didn't that be a First Amendment violation?
Well, you know, that's a good question. It does say state regulations and documents and reports. So it's really directing state authorities. So, Steve?
Hi, Henry. There's still no oversight after the medication is prescribed. In other words, no medical person has to be there when it's administered. Or
That's a great question, and that's the truth. There's nobody who has to be present when the person is taking the medication. And in fact, there's no record kept of anyone who is present. So when the person takes the medication, you don't know who's with them, if anyone. And what you certainly don't know what pressure can be put on someone to take the stuff.
Right. Yeah. To me, that's one of the biggest issues. And I was standing outside a pole on the last time, and somebody came up to me and said, we had this sign that said, "This is bad law," which it was. If it didn't have all these problems, would you be in favor of this bill? I said, well, I'm opposed in philosophically, basically, but I would not be. But I got the feeling that she may have voted against it, but that if there were all kinds of safeguards, she probably philosophically was not opposed. And this is my fear, that's why I'm glad you're telling people to try to change people's hearts and minds, because it seemed like they didn't, but if they took care of all these problems, that the thing would pass, because a lot of people are philosophically inclined to go along with it. So we need to change the hearts and minds.
Absolutely. And the other side is always trying to change the focus of the specifics of the bill that's going to become law to the broader philosophical question. For example, when Rosie Bacon Mead was on the Dan Ray show, she was doing a very good job, but Dan kept interrupting her, saying, okay, I understand you're against the bill, but if these, if the objections you have are, addressed in the legislation, would you still be opposed? And she said, well, yes, of course. He says, okay, we got that. Now we'll go on to the next caller. Yeah. So just a masterful job of deflecting the conversation.
Right. So to summarize, I would think they were smart enough to know that there were all these problems that people had, even with people who were not philosophically opposed to it. Why didn't they address them? I mean, I thank God they didn't, but why didn't they address them and make it cleaned up all this?
Well, that's a good question. This bill was modeled very closely on the two in Oregon and Washington State. Right. And it's almost word for word. The Compassion and Choices, the old Hemlock Society, it doesn't want those safeguards in. And I think that's where this is coming from. And I think they'll be brazen and just count on society changing. Some of the problems with it just can't be addressed in Massachusetts, like the need to extend the right, quote unquote, to the incompetent patients. That's basically constitutional law here. So that'll be a permanent problem with any bill that they suggest along these lines. Yes, please.
I just wondered if the attending physician does not have to be with the patient when they're taking the meds, then how can that be done, or death with dignity? How can it be a dignified way of going when there's nobody around to see the patient die?
That's well said. Thank you. Yeah, please, Member. Yes.
Yeah, doesn't a doctor taking part in this at all, isn't that a violation of the Hippocratic Oath? I mean, isn't that just off, but often? How can a doctor actually participate in this? And maybe that's why they anticipate so few doing it.
Well, I think that's part of the Mass Medical Society's opposition. You're implicating the medical profession now into from being healers to being complicit in death.
Yeah, totally around
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, and yes, thank you. Please.
Yes, I went to a seminar given by Mass General Hospital, and this was like the day of the election last November. And the physician was talking about how it's legal in Oregon and Washington. And one of the problems that really struck me is that patients can be at home alone or with other people, and they have to ingest 100 pills, and they may vomit in the process. The medication can cause nausea, they can actually just vomit. So it's a botched physician-assisted suicide. So I'm bringing that up as one of the horrors that could happen.
No, that's a great point, and some people will die from asphyxiation of the vomit. They'll aspirate the vomit. That's correct. Brendan, please.
This last go-around was a state initiative. It was the first time ever, I think, that conservatives had more money for ads than pro-life people did than pro-death people. And so now their strategy is to go into the legislature and there. Do you think if they lose there, will they go back out and try to do another issue?
I tend to think so. I think it's 2018 is the earliest they can go back to the people. So I expect it to be on the ballot in 2018 if it's not, if it is stopped at the legislature. Yes.
When I went to talks on this, and they were all kind of forward, I would always raise the question, why do you need a law to commit suicide? And it just threw them off. They couldn't answer it.
Right, this exists already.
I mean, you can commit suicide. Why do you need physicians to okay?
No, they want the medical establishment behind it.
Right.
And, yes, please.
Can a pharmacist refuse to fill the prescriptions?
As I read the law, yes, because they are, the definition of healthcare provider is broad enough to include pharmacists, the conscience provisions within the Constitution. John?
Henry, the supporters of bills like this go back as far as Margaret Sanger, Joseph Mengele, Adolf Hitler. How do we get that information out to the people without coming off like a bunch of fanatics? Because we know it's these people that are supporting this bill. You know, the old Hemlock Society, they printed up their names so they wouldn't be associated. How do we get that out there without making ourselves look foolish?
Well, you know, that's a great question, and I would only suggest that we at least go back to Derek Humphrey, who people know, and who is really the current, for want of a better term, mad dog of the euthanasia movement, or at least was a few years ago. And he put it on the map in this country. But rather than focus on the personalities, I think if we focus on the impact and what it is they're trying to do. I don't know, maybe, well, I'll withdraw that. But I think focusing on the impact rather than the genesis is more effective, but leave that to your discretion. Sir.
Regarding the question about the pharmacist, I thought one of your slides says that if a facility or a medical professional does not want to, or has a conscientious objection, they still have to provide a list of where the services can be obtained.
Yes, I think that was the facility, healthcare facility rather than healthcare provider. But I don't believe a pharmacist himself or herself would have to make such a provision. I believe it would be more the hospital, nursing home, what have you. Yes, sir.
What is your opinion about the primary motivation behind this movement?
That,
I've wondered about it myself. Is it the need to? Is it a anti-religion, anti-God, a need for control, cost-cutting measure? It's
I'm not sure. I don't think qualified to answer the question. But what I'd like to do is just have everyone keep in mind, rather than the leadership, a lot of the folks who are for this are really motivated by a sense of the good, that they truly want to relieve suffering, and they truly believe that death is preferable to life. There's certainly an element of control, that they believe they should be able to control their own death. I think when, as you know, society is largely divorced from Christianity, and largely divorced from the idea that we're stewards of our lives, and that we owe them to God and to other people. The leadership is very, I'm not sure there's the sense of altruism on the leadership. Ann?
Henry, there is something very positive about education, which I think we have to remember. When we were polling, we found that if the thing was called death with dignity, 75% of the people were in favor. The same people later in the poll, if the word physician-assisted suicide was used, it went down to 65. And if doctor prescribed suicide, it went down to 55. So that was the same person in a short period of time with different wording. And I think that's very positive. What that says is that these people aren't lost. They're just not educated well enough. And it really is up to us to keep at it, keep at it, keep at it.
I think the phrase "death with dignity" has lost a lot of its luster, because notice the other side didn't use it in entitling their bill. So they talked about care in whatever. Yes, very good. Well, I want to thank everybody for their patience and hospitality and forbearance.